Welcome to Nole Edge, the official podcast of the College of Arts and Sciences at Florida State University. I'm your host, Amy Walden, the Assistant Director for Visual and Social Media with the college, and today we welcome Jair Mehta, an Assistant Professor in the Department of Anthropology here at FSU. Jair, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, great to see you again. Jair has been on the faculty here at FSU since 2018 and specializes in the study of North American, Native Americans, human-environment relationships, and the consequences of French and Spanish colonization in the Gulf South. Jair, on today's episode, we're discussing the research you've conducted as an environmental archaeologist and some of your recent work in highlighting cultural considerations in coastal restoration projects in the southeastern United States. So before we dive into that, I'd love to learn a little bit more about you. Can you tell us how you first became interested in studying anthropology?
Yeah, I was young, so I was like 16, and I got to do a summer camp. It was like a science summer camp through a university in North Carolina, and I got to be in the field every day doing archaeology for like 4 weeks, digging in the ground, finding artifacts. We're learning about this fort, Fort Neohoroka, that was lived in by the Tuscarora Indians who had migrated south to kind of escape some of the British Revolutionary War forces. And they were kind of stuck in between the Americans and the British, and it was their place of safety and refuge. And it was a really neat project. I got to do all of that. And, I think my parents had sent me off there to study, like, oh, you're going to be a doctor. And so you do some science summer camp, and that's kind of how it started. And I just always stayed interested in archaeology. I went to undergrad at Chapel Hill, and the archaeology there was absolutely incredible. And I just got to do field school after field school. I got a job in the lab there. And I think, honestly, that's what was probably the most important thing. It really kept me in the department, kept me going. And I just did more archaeology every time I had a chance to. We did excavations on campus when they were like renovating buildings. And it was just such a fascinating pursuit because it's science, it's a humanity, it's all of these different disciplines kind of wrapped up together. And I think that's what I really liked about it. It's creative. You have to be able to think up questions to ask and find new and exciting ways to answer them. Ultimately, I went to go get my doctorate. I was like 27, which is a little bit later than some people do it. But, I wanted to kind of keep my training going. And ultimately, that's what I did. I ended up in New Orleans at Tulane and went to Illinois for a year and then ended up here at FSU.
Great. Well, we are so glad that you ended up at FSU.
Me too. It's been fantastic. It really has.
We're right on the coast, so lots of research that is right up your alley. So I want to get started talking a little bit about some of your research. Some of your latest fieldwork and publications focus on the archaeological sites that are being threatened by things like rising sea levels and erosion. This includes earthen and shell mounds built hundreds of years ago by indigenous people in the Mississippi River Delta. So for those who are unfamiliar with your work, can you tell us more about exactly what these mounds are and why they're so important?
Yeah, that's a great question, really, to ask, what these things were in the past. And it's not a simple answer either. Sometimes they were built really quickly as big community-style events. Sometimes these mounds were in a variety of different shapes, circles and squares and octagons. Sometimes they are places where native peoples buried their dead. They're ossuaries or cemeteries. So these mounds had all different kinds of functions and purposes at different points in time, and especially in really flat places like marshes, deltaic marshes. These mounds create sometimes very little topography, sometimes a lot of topography, several meters. And in any one of those situations, over time, these slightly elevated landforms, these highly elevated landforms, began to support all different kinds of biodiversity and wildlife. And what's fascinating is that you can then see all of these places just by changes in the plant life. And in many ways, archaeologists have asked the question and are trying to answer, in what ways was the creation of these new ecosystems with greater levels of biodiversity a purposeful endeavor, right? Certainly seems like, we've seen this all over the world in various places. Sometimes we call it anthropogenic biodiversity. We have different words for it, but it all seems to surround this question of, in what ways was the ecology of the landscape changed by Native peoples? In the book Gulf by Jack Davis, fantastic book, he says that everything from Miami to Galveston is a human-made landscape by Native peoples. And there are shell mounds, shell rings, earthen mounds that ring this entire Gulf. And so we have to ask ourselves, when we think about things like, well, what was the environment like in the past? Are we going to try to restore coastal marshes? What are we restoring back to? We have to sort of think about this question. Well, for how many thousands of years were Native peoples engineering an ecosystem along the northern Gulf Coast that would serve their benefits, that would enhance the biodiversity, create villages in these really low-lying environments where they could see further and they could walk across the really marshy environments. So there's a lot of different reasons why they were made, and they are important because they are the record of a people who lived in this world lived in this region for over 15,000 years. They are the sort of material remains of a culture. The kind of challenge that we face is sea levels are rising, landforms are eroding, and if we don't do something now to save these sites, we're going to continue to lose them, at a greater rate. And I think that would be the tragedy, is if especially in low-lying portions of the Gulf, if we lose that cultural patrimony, the history of these peoples.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And what really stuck with me from your last interview that we had was, what are we restoring back to? I thought that was a great point to make. So last year, your team received funding from the National Science Foundation to study these areas and help inform coastal restoration practices by evaluating the entire ecosystem, including archaeological sites, which you just talked about a little bit. What questions were you trying to answer at the outset of this project, and what kind of work was conducted?
Sure. Yeah. So this project is called the Gulf Resilience Hub, and it's funded under the National Science Foundation's Coastline and People Initiative. And the reason that we are doing this work is we want to provide the best possible science that we can give to coastal communities as they ask themselves the question about how are we going to respond to changing climates. We can raise our buildings. We can harden shorelines. We can build seawalls. We can plan evacuation strategies. All of those different parameters require a litany of different policies, investments, procedures, planning strategies. Our team is composed of wave modelers, geotechnical engineers, structural engineers, archaeologists, sociologists, anthropologists, policy planners, network scientists, game theorists. And this sort of really complex team, all of us are taking our various skills, and with our community partners, we're hoping to over a series of years, provide the best possible science that we can to help our community partners stay resilient and plan for resilience, which means understanding their vulnerabilities, understanding the best methods for adaptation, understanding where, in what ways can they best plan for a long-term future.
What did you and your team find as a result of this work?
Yeah, also a great question. I think the first thing that we found is that it's really hard to talk science across fields for which you may not have a whole lot of training. What's helped is, we meet frequently, we meet in person, which means 15 people all have to travel to the same place and, spend 3 8-hour days talking to one another, which is a lot of talking.
Yeah.
And this, so that's kind of been one of the things that we've learned doing this work together. This is called translational research, or there's a whole series of words for it. But it's applied science. Like fundamentally, this is about like, what can we do? What science can we create that's going to be ultimately of benefit? One of the things that I'm doing is, just surveying the community and having focus groups and talking about weather, talking about climate, getting to understand how they feel about the science of climate change and these types of topics, which really helps us understand where they are, where the community is, in thinking about these types of like big systematic problems. And it's really fascinating to see also, and as over time, like over the past year or two, of just talking with community members, how the perception of climate science has changed as well in good ways. The project that really takes up a lot of my time and student training is the Evergreen Plantation Archaeological Survey. And so every other summer, I go into the field with 6 to 10 different undergraduates from all over the country. I take my graduate students, and we go and live on a sugar plantation in Louisiana. That's where most of my work is. It's a National Historic Landmark, and there are 50 different buildings still standing on this property, many of them dating to the late 1700s, early 1800s, including 22 buildings that were lived in by free people of color and enslaved Africans. Enslaved Africans from 1800 until 1865, and then free people of color until 1944, roughly. And so this place is a 150-year record of human life, of families, of communities, of people forcibly enslaved, of free people who lived and worked on a sugar plantation. Those 22 buildings are still standing, and they held hundreds of different people over a really long period of time. So we're seeking to understand the daily life of people who lived under slavery, who lived under Reconstruction, who lived under Jim Crow, and we do that by excavating in and around those buildings, which gives us all the material record of their daily lives, the food that they ate, the plates that they ate on. And so part of the work too is that we try to remember that even within the context of enslavement or oppression, that the families who lived there, they had their lives, that they lived their lives, right, and they got married, had kids, and they sort of all of the sort of things that happened there. We try to reconstruct that story. And so that's what that project is focused in on. And I work with some collaborators here at FSU, Dr. Alicia Gaines, and work with another professor from FAMU, Natalie King-Pedroso. And, we've been training students there for a while. And, that project to me is really, it's going to be the next 10, 15 years, of my life. And ultimately what we'll have is this long history of people and of families and of communities and, the stories that haven't been told because there wasn't an opportunity to do so. I'm doing other work with fishing communities in Louisiana. So where we work for the Gulf Resilience Hub, there's a lot of big lakes in the interior of the Atchafalaya Basin. And those lakes have been changed since 1927 by the Army Corps of Engineers, who levied off the Atchafalaya to protect the Mississippi River and to protect coastal communities from river-based flooding. So because of the changes in the hydrology and the geomorphology of that region, a lot of these big inland lakes no longer receive freshwater inflow. So they've started to silt and fill in. And over the past 50 years or so, 80 years, many fisher people from that community that we work with have said that, we're not fishing for markets anymore. We're not fishing as a job or as a career. We can fish for ourselves. And there are still some folks out there who are doing fishing for market. But as a whole, that fishery has changed significantly. So our work links the archaeology to the present because these shell middens that surround this area are full of fish bones, animal bones, all of the things that people hunted and fished for in the past. So I can reconstruct what the environment looked like 1,500 years ago. I can reconstruct that environment 1,000 years ago. I can identify what was in the environment, what fish were available in the water, what sizes they were, all of that. We can also look to all of the historical data from legacies of fishermen who worked in that area, and then also all of the fish and wild from, people who buy fishing licenses. We can reconstruct the fishery over the past 80 years. And then we can actually study the fishery in its modern setting. So this is also a big interdisciplinary science team where we have 2 biologists. We've got archaeologists, anthropologists, climate scientists who are looking at the impact of changing climates on the fishery. So we have, again, a big interdisciplinary science team asking an applied science question. What was the fishery like in the past? What can we do to restore the fishery back to, again, what that's the question. What are we restoring back to? How far back can we go? So that's ongoing and a pretty interesting and fun project that I'm happy to be a part of.
Great. Speaking of students, what advice do you have for students who maybe have listened to this podcast and may be interested in studying archaeology or pursuing career fields in anthropology?
Think about what anthropology is asking, right? It's the study of humanity. It's the study of people, our lives and our problems in the present and in the past. You can ask questions about the past through so many different disciplines: geology, archaeology, paleoclimatology. So if a student's passion is in a different field but related, I always encourage students to pursue as many different fields and disciplines as they can. So I encourage any student, right, to think about anthropology, even if it's not a particular core interest or it's not a field or discipline they want to follow. To take anthropology classes because of the perspective it gives them on the whole scope of humanity, from our earliest evolutionary beginnings to the present moment, to the modern moment.
Terrific. Well, I'm inspired now and I want to study anthropology. So, Jair, we end every podcast with our bowl of mystery questions. So please draw a question and answer.
Oh, boy. Here we go. What's one thing I would take with me on a desert island? I don't know. Well, I guess I would take my family, but
that is such a good answer.
I don't know. I'm going to trap them with me on this desert island. I don't think that's a good idea.
You can all keep each other entertained. That's hilarious. Well, Jair, thank you so much for joining us today on Nole Edge. And if you would like to learn more about Jair Mehta's work in the Department of Anthropology here at FSU, visit anthro.fsu.edu. Thanks for tuning into Nole Edge, and we'll catch you next time.